I declare the ordinary council meeting on the 20th of April 2021 held in the council chambers at the City Subiaco open at 5:30 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Wadja Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to the city. Please note this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the city website following the meeting. Confidential sections of council meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. The Mayor Taylor is an apology this evening, and so I am presiding. I'm the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Stephanie Stroud. Moving on to point 2, attendance apologies and leave of absence. I have an apologies from Mayor Taylor and a leave of absence from Councillor Murray Rowe. Moving on to item 3, disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 20 April 2021, agenda item C11. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates. The nature of my interest is that Mayor Taylor has informed me that she believes my amendment is simply an attack on her. The code will in fact apply to all council and committee members, both present members and, just as importantly, future members. But out of an abundance of caution, I am making this declaration. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more other disclosures? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Presiding Member. It's also in regard to C11. I wish to declare an impartiality interest in item C11. There is an amendment proposed to this item for consideration tonight. Today I became aware the Mayor perceived the amendment as directed towards her. I declare I will consider the item and the amendment, if tabled, independently and objectively in the wider context of the use of social media in the Code of Conduct. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any more disclosures? Okay, I have a disclosure. I, Councillor Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 20th of April 2021 with agenda item C11. The type of interest I wish to declare is an impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is Councillor Hammersley's amendment addresses the publishing of factually correct material that is not misleading by omission or innuendo, and further to remove from social media, etc., such material. In an email to Councillor Hammersley, Mayor Taylor has taken offence to the amendment as an attack because of her active social media. Given this response by the Mayor, it could reasonably be perceived to adversely impact my impartiality either for or against the amendment. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, response to previous public questions taken on notice. There are nil. Moving on to item 5, public question time. The Acting Chief Executive Officer, Cliff Fruing, will now read the conditions of entry statement.
Thank you, and through the Chair, good evening, councillors and members of the gallery. The conditions of entry and behaviour to this ordinary council meeting are contained in a statement displayed on the door on entry to the chamber. Please ensure you are familiar with the conditions so that the meeting can be conducted at an appropriate standard. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now moving on to public question time, followed by public statement time, and welcome to all those who wish to step up to the rostrum and speak tonight. Don't forget to turn the little light on, and please keep to your period of time. So starting off with question time, we have Helen Leader of Cuthbert Street, Shenton Park. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff. The Mayor has been quoted in a weekly paper, the West Australian newspaper, and with the links onto her own Facebook page, as saying she believed she was being impeded in her role by city staff. Quote, "I have been told by senior staff that I cannot do things that are the remit of the Mayor, as stipulated in the Act, and it is only after obtaining my own legal advice at my own expense that this has been reversed," she said. Quote continues, "I find it hard to believe that senior governance staff at the city are incompetent, and therefore I can only put this down to deliberate behaviour to undermine me." Unquote. I, like many in the community, am horrified by the Mayor's suggestion that the city's senior governance staff are deliberately undermining her. Question 1. For the sake of clarity, would the Mayor or the administration elaborate on the issues that have caused the Mayor to make these assertions? And question 2, has the Mayor brought this serious matter to the Standards Panel? Thank you.
Thank you, and through the Chair, in response to question 1, city officers hold the roles of Mayor and councillors in high regard and endeavour to support them in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act. I disagree with the assertions made against the city's administration staff. I have no knowledge of any disrespectful behaviour towards the Mayor by the administration, and if there was, it would not be tolerated. Question 2, the Local Government Standards Panel can only look into minor breach complaints that are made against elected members under Division 4 of the City of Subiaco Code of Conduct for council members, committee members and candidates.
Thank you. We now have Ian Scott to give a public statement on C5. Ian Scott has an address at Jersey Street, Jolimont. Would you... Oh, there you are, the rostrum. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors. Our project was first presented to the City's Design Review Panel on the 18th of November 2020. The DRP meetings were not favourable, resulting in 4 of the 10 design principles not being supported, that is red, and 6 requiring attention, orange. No design principles received the DRP's outright support. Due to time constraints linked to the government incentives, we did not have time to return to the DRP before presenting our proposal to the JDAP on the 10th of February. We did, however, revise the design in line with the DRP's recommendations prior to our JDAP presentation. JDAP supported our proposal for 6 stories with a plot ratio of 3:1 as outlined in LPS 5. The JDAP chair confirmed that there was no need for us to carry out a full redesign and recommended a 90-day deferral period to give us time to revise our response to 4 design principles only and present back to the DRP before the next JDAP meeting. We represented our revised design to the DRP on the 23rd of March. The minutes of this meeting show that the DRP supported 7 principles, as green, and noted 3 as pending further attention, orange. There were now no principles that were not supported. We consider moving the design from 4 reds, 6 oranges and no greens to 7 greens and 3 oranges to have clearly demonstrated our commitment to improving the design to achieve the best outcome and confirms our positive response to the recommendations of both JDAP and the city's DRP. The three principles identified by the DRP as pending further attention were sustainability, built form and scale, and landscape. Of the three items identified as pending attention, we have complied with sustainability, accepted the recommendation on built form as a condition of approval, leaving the third, landscape. It was suggested that a section of the first floor balcony serving the southern apartment be removed to facilitate the planting of a 4-metre high tree in the in-ground landscaped area outside the residence lounge. We have not proceeded with this for the following reasons. 1. The usable balcony area is currently 11 square metres, which is only 1 square metre over the required usable area. 2. The dividing wall between the first floor balconies shades the northern portion of the southern balcony. Removing the southern portion of that balcony would leave the remaining area with almost no solar access. And 3, the street tree will shade the entire area. Therefore, we considered it best landscaped through the use of plants suited to growing in full shade. We have also increased the area of on-structure planting as recommended. Thank you.
You may finish your statement. I'll give you more.
Oh, sorry. Oh, it's one sentence. We trust our response to the DRP's recommendations meets with your approval, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. The next statement we have from Robert Walker of Roberts Road, Subiaco. This is on the RAR of C6. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Robert Walker. I'm a planning consultant at Planning Solutions. I'm speaking on behalf of Blackburn Property Group, who, as you know, is progressing the One Subiaco development at the Markets Pavilion site on the corner of Rockaby Road and Roberts Road. I'm speaking today in support of the officer's recommendation for agenda item C6, which is the application to amend the existing development approval for the One Subiaco development. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the city's officers for their continued support on this application and continued hard work on this project. I know it's gone on for a few years now, so it's very much appreciated. The report prepared was diligent and it demonstrates comprehensive understanding as to why these amendments have been proposed. The proposed amendments as part of this application are very minor and do not substantially alter the approved development. As highlighted in the city's RAR, the amendments relate mainly to the internal reconfiguration of selected apartments and ground floor tenancies, which do not alter the external appearance or general operational capacity of the building. The number of apartments overall is proposed to be reduced by 8 from 242 dwellings to 234, which will be undertaken by amalgamating some of the smaller apartments into larger apartments. The dwelling mix is also proposed to be slightly changed. The amount of studio and 1-bedroom dwellings will be slightly reduced with an increased provision in 2-bedroom dwellings. Subsequently, bicycle parking has also been slightly modified to incorporate these changes, and additional on-street bicycle parking will be proposed. I think it's an additional 6 bays. These amendments have been proposed really for 2 main reasons. Firstly, the modifications will improve the overall functionality and will improve the experience for future residents of One Subiaco and for visitors. And secondly, many of the proposed modifications have been specifically requested by interested purchasers of apartments in the One Subiaco development, and Blackburn are simply accommodating these requests in this application. So taking these reasons into account, the proposed modifications are very minor. The DRP has confirmed they consider the changes to the design to be appropriate, and the city's officers have carried out a thorough assessment and confirmed their support for this application. So we therefore respectfully request the council upholds the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and please pass on my compliments to the expert containment of the construction. It's a site that I pass almost daily, and as quickly as that pathway may close on Roberts Road, it reopens, everything's hosed down. The gentlemen who are managing it are always polite and helpful, and so far, terrific work, so thank you. We now are up to agenda item 7, petitions and approved deputations. Do we have any? No, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda 8, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. The minutes to be considered tonight are the ordinary council meeting of the 23rd of March 2021. Do we have a mover and seconder for these minutes? Thank you, Councillor Mansfield and Councillor Jennings. We'll put this to the vote. Thank you. The vote is carried unanimously. Moving on to agenda item number 9, announcements by the presiding member without discussion. There are none. So, now we're moving on to the officers' reports, and for the information of the public gallery, it is intended that a number of the recommendations presented to this meeting will be grouped together and passed en bloc, as no amendments or alternative motions have been received on these particular items. So I'll now ask the meeting whether there are any agenda items that they wish to be drawn off the en bloc. And I'll just grab a pen while we do that. So, yes, thank you, Councillor Janet.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would like C10 withdrawn, thanks. Purchase and dedication of Austin Street Laneway as public road, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davis. Yes, that's good. I always like when there are statements in the gallery about an item. I think it's important that they hear the debate. Is there any other items we need to pull off en bloc? Okay, thank you, councillors. So we now need a mover and seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nash and Councillor Mansfield. Thank you. And this is for the items E1, C1, C2, C3, C4, C6, C7, C8, C9, C14, C16 and C17 contained in the agenda of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 20th of April 2021 be adopted en bloc. We'll put this to the vote. Thank you. Thank you. That's carried unanimously. So, the first item then for the council to address is C5, which is the Responsible Authority Report, 66 Jersey Street, Jolimont. And that is on page 27. Thank you. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this item, please? Okay, so this item was actually pulled by Councillor Davis. Right, so mover and seconder, we have Councillor De Vries and Councillor Hammersley. Thank you. Councillor De Vries, would you like to talk to this item?
I'll defer, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hammersley, will you be talking to this item?
I'll also reserve my right. Thanks.
Councillor Davis, would you like to speak to this item? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I guess I should explain why I've pulled this from the en bloc. I do intend to actually vote against the officer recommendation, and I'll provide some background as to why I'm making that decision. Two reasons. It's to do with the revisions that have been made to the proposal, as well as the overarching issue of the local development plan for the Jolimont District Centre. I did listen to the JDAP meeting on the 10th of February. I think it was an online meeting, so everyone had an opportunity to listen to it online. And at that meeting, the previous application was deferred, and there were a series of reasons given for that deferral, and they're outlined on page 28 of our agenda, and they're fairly clear. In short, the JDAP gave the applicant an opportunity to revisit landscaping, the internal function of the building or space planning, daylight or access to daylight, interface with the street, materiality, elevational treatments, and the form of the building in its context. And I suppose most importantly, it gave them the opportunity to revisit those things and go back to the design review panel and have it reconsidered. Now, a review of the drawings that I've undertaken indicates to me there's significant planning and design adjustments have taken place quite recently. Evidently, the applicant has taken the opportunity to respond to each of the areas of concern. The setbacks have increased, and I also note that many of the setbacks that were proposed and are proposed are still in excess of the requirements. The plot ratio has been marginally reduced. The deep soil and planting on structure has been increased and improved. The access to solar and daylight has been improved. Natural ventilation to habitable rooms has been fully addressed, and the facade has been redesigned and has the full support of the design review panel. So in summary, the DRP has gone from providing an amber or pending further attention score to green or in support on the design issues of context and character, amenity, safety and aesthetics, which is a pretty comprehensive result, I would have thought. So then we revisit the revised RAR, and it appears to me that the key reasons for refusal are now height and plot ratio. And this goes to the preparation of an LDP. These key issues were the reason for the refusal in the initial RAR, and they continue to be the reason for refusal in this revised RAR. However, those issues are born out of the fact that a local development plan is required for the precinct and hasn't been undertaken. Now, the RAR states, and I quote, "It is the city's intent to prepare an LDP for the Jolimont District Centre to guide future redevelopment. However, the timing for this to occur is uncertain. Indeed, the Minister for Planning and the West Australian Planning Commission have endorsed the need for an LDP. However, rather than instigating this process ourselves as a city, as we have at Rockaby South and indeed in our at the bottom of Rockaby Road in our town centre, we're instead asking a single landowner to undertake this LDP. Now, I'm not completely comfortable with that, and I question whether it's fair or reasonable to push the preparation of an LDP back on a single landowner when, particularly given the City of Subiaco is a large landowner in this precinct. In fact, the largest landowner in the precinct. The RAR continues on that in the absence of a formal position to specifically define the desired future character of the area, or read an LDP, the city may refer to the desired streetscape character outlined and illustrated in Appendix 2 of the R codes, being residential RAC3. The streetscape character is designated as a high-density urban centre, providing for largely commercial development with some residential. It continues, the city acknowledges that six-storey development may occur at this density code in some form. So it's clear to me that when we default to the RAC zoning, that six-storey proposal and the corresponding plot ratio Further, it is reasonably clear that an LDP would realise these exact planning controls. The question, I suppose, is who is responsible for preparing the LDP? Again, I think it's unreasonable and undesirable to push this responsibility onto a single landowner. The city is the largest stakeholder here. Defaulting to the RAC3 zoning supports the scale of development proposed, and it is anticipated that the LDP, when complete, will provide the planning framework to support this scale of development also. I think the applicant has done everything that has been reasonably asked of them through this deferral, and for that reason I will not continue to support the refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Thank you, Councillor McMullen.
It's just a question through you, presiding member. I think Councillor Davis spoke quite convincingly, and obviously it's an area he knows a lot about. I just wonder if we could have a staff comment on some of the things we've just heard, and perhaps a view as to whether something's been missed or overlooked in assessing the revised proposal. Thank you.
Excuse me for a minute, Councillor McMullen. I'm just concerned you're drawing the staff into a debate. Do you have something more specific about your question? Thank you.
Oh, I don't, and it's a practice I've seen occur quite a bit in the past. I suppose my question to staff then is, what do you think about what you just heard from Councillor Davis?
Sorry, Councillor McMullen, I'm still not happy about that, and it may have been occurred in the past, but certainly not when I'm sitting in the chair. So could you just please give that a little bit more thought, and we'll get back to that. You do have a staff comment to the statement. Perhaps you can draw something from that. Is there anybody else who would like to? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Can I just check? Do we have an amendment, an alternate in front of us? Because I haven't seen one. I'm just wondering.
Councillor Phelan, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was just briefly going to mention that I also plan to vote against the item for a lot of the reasons that Councillor Davis just mentioned, and I'll just add that I think it's an area that's non-controversial, and the development suits the area that it's in.
Anybody else who'd like to speak to this item? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Actually, mine's just another question. Yeah, just trying to pick up on what was said in the address and the officer's comments. So I think what I'm understanding is that the key issue really arises around the additional stories and that the qualification for that is that you need to meet all of the design excellence requirements. Am I correct in that?
Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member. Yes, and additional qualifications are for the preparation of a local development plan in and around the area. So the whole purpose and intent for that is to consider development as it exceeds the base height and controls. And the whole premise of putting that in our planning scheme when it was finalised not too long ago was so as to allow a local development plan and controls to evolve over time, and not to then go back and request permission from the WAPC to do these sorts of things. In no time did we stipulate that it must be prepared by a single landowner. There is just that option to do that under the regulations, and we've made that clear to many people around the city.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Through you, Presiding Member, just a question. Why is there not a local development plan at the moment? Why hasn't one been drawn up?
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member, the simple answer is that since the Gazette of LPS 5, we focused on the local planning policies, the finalisation of the Rockaby Road South Local Development Plan and the Seddon Street Local Development Plan. There's simply hasn't been enough bums on seats to be able to do that and time to be able to do that. It's still the city's intention to do that, and it can be a very detailed process to get all the nuanced planning controls correct.
Is there any indicative timeframe when one may be prepared?
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. In any event, even if one was started now, it would take some time to prepare. So I won't be able to give you an indicative timeframe as there might be other priorities in the city's local planning strategy and local planning scheme for projects.
Just excuse me for a moment, because Councillor De Vries had put a... Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Nash.
So just to be clear about this, are the city saying that they believe it's reasonable when the city is the major landholder of that area, that one single applicant be asked to prepare a DLP over the whole area?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, no, we're not saying that that is reasonable. What we're saying is that the provisions in the LPS regulations allow for a landowner to prepare it. So in no time have we said that it must be prepared by them, but we have given landowners an availability that option exists should they seek to go down that path.
Any more questions? Councillor McMullen, have you thought of something to ask? Thank you.
Let's see if this one gets passed. Through you, Deputy Mayor, have the planning staff heard anything in the debate from any elected member tonight that changes or puts a different slant on the advice that's in the officer report?
I'm sorry, Councillor McMullen. You are asking staff to enter a debate there. So you're being quite mischievous. Now, do you have a question to ask that would be more obviously suitable?
Look, I respectfully disagree, because Councillor Davis has given his speech after the officer report was written, so that's the only reason why I'm wanting a bit of staff comment. But look, I'm not going to try and rephrase the question. If you're not going to allow it, I'll just vote on what's in the report.
Yes, Councillor Hammersley.
Just another question following on. As we don't have an alternative in front of us, we're faced with either voting in favour or not. So what I'm wondering is, I presume there's a deadline, and I presume that the RAR has to go to the DAP. Can we be told when that deadline is? And would I be correct in understanding the consequences of a refusal without some alternate that explains why we would approve it? It's just going to go off anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Manager.
Thank you, and through your presiding member. So we had 90 days from the deadline is 11th of May 2021. And what I would say is that in the Responsible Authority report, the city's officers have prepared an alternative. So if council turned its mind to an alternative, then it could simply have a simple resolution which says that the alternative recommendation in the Responsible Authority report is the one that they put up. So there's an option there, and that would easily be sent off. In any event, we have given an undertaking to the applicants to have this to the DAP Secretariat quite quickly after this meeting to assist them in having a determination made. So my recommendation will be to make a call tonight so that can be done and we follow process quite quickly. Whether that's the officer recommendation for refusal or alternatively the alternate in the Responsible Authority report, which is there. In any event, I don't think there's been anything tonight to persuade the officers to change their recommendation at this stage.
Councillors, Councillor De Vries, would you like to now speak to the item, and will you be closing? So before we suggest that, no, you won't be, because Councillor Powell has a question. So would you like to speak to the item first, or would you like? Okay, Councillor Powell, thank you.
Thank you very much. Through you, presiding member. Councillor Davis mentioned that height and plot ratio were two of the key areas of concern. Does the application, as it is, meet the criteria for bonuses on height and plot ratio? Thank you.
Thank you. And through your presiding member, the height remains the same as the original recommendation for refusal, and plot ratio has been reduced, but is still over the development control. So that's why the recommendation and reasons for refusal based on these two matters are still retained.
Do we have any more questions or debate on this item? Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak as a second speaker? No. Okay, then Councillor De Vries, would you like to speak and close on this item, please?
I'll keep this quite brief. I do support the officer's recommendation, and I think I picked up one point in their RAR that the community need to trust our policies. They need to trust our decision makers to be able to use those policies to make the best decision for proper and orderly planning in our city. And I think this is what we really are talking about here. I know, look, it's clear that the developer's gone back and made changes, and I'm really happy to see that many of those changes work to that proper and orderly planning in the city. But the R codes and the LPS 5 have principles, have guidelines in there for what works and what won't work. And I think we have to really consider this isn't a decision about what's going to happen today or what's going to happen next week. It's about years ahead. And we need to look years ahead. We need to think about the urban form of our city. And I really have to say, I think that the officers have done that. And again, you know, it's difficult to refuse something that obviously is trying to bring a bit more development to Jersey Street, and I live not so far from there, so I'm aware of that area. It is a mixed area, but we still need to act with caution. But moreover, we have to assess these decisions against the R codes, elements, objectives, and against the LPS 5. So given the number of objectives that have not been met, and I think there's, you know, one only needs to read the RAR to see that there's a huge number. It's not just a few discretions. It's quite a significant number of our codes have not been met. I mean, just setbacks alone, as well as the height. These are important decisions that I think we need to make about the city and its future, not just about making this one development go through. And you know, certainly I'm sure that it will eventually go ahead. I'm sure that there'll be some further amendments as has already been the case. But I do definitely read that RAR with a great deal of encouragement to the fact that our policies or our LPS 5 and our R codes can be here to protect the orderly and proper planning of the city. So I do support this and commend this to you.
Thank you, councillors. Would you like to now please vote on this item? Councillor, we have a casting vote on this item, and that's a first for me. Now, so I just reach for the other item. Now, my understanding with a casting vote is that you vote for the status quo. My understanding would therefore be, I'll just defer to the CEO for the moment.
It's entirely up to you.
Okay, thank you. So in exercising my casting vote, I am voting against the staff recommendation to refuse, and the vote is 6-5. So now we move on to the alternative 5-6. No, 6-5 because it's carried 6-5. So it's lost. It's lost. It's lost 6-5. Yeah, 5-6. I'm a bit dyslexic with numbers. Sorry. So we now move to the alternative that the staff have prepared. Is that the correct process? Thank you, Manager of. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess it's a point of order, I think, but there's no alternative before the meeting. So I don't know how we can vote on an alternative.
Well, I understand there is an alternative in the RAR that's put up. So, okay, so it's. I'll just seek governance advice on this. Thank you.
Through you, presiding member. As there is no alternative, if a member puts up a motion following the fact that this motion has now been dealt with under 2.5, the member presiding can determine whether that is relevant to this matter, and it can be considered under that clause of the meeting procedures local law, but it would require a member to be putting forward a motion for consideration.
If that is acceptable to Council for a member to put up a motion, I will give you a couple of minutes. Do I have anyone who's interested in putting up a motion? Yes, Councillor Mansfield.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Stroud. I'm just having a look. I'm back at the RAR on page 28 of the officers' RAR, and I am reading the alternative that has been provided there. Could the staff provide some meaning as to if council was of a mind to put forward this alternative, essentially what that would mean in terms of the progression of this application?
Just give him a minute. Thank you, Councillor Mansfield. While our manager's just sorting things out, I just noticed one of the gentlemen did take a photograph from the gallery. Can I have your assurance that you weren't actually photographing any members? Okay. We are not allowed to, so if you wouldn't mind not taking any photographs, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, I am just transferring the alternative from the RAR, and we'll have it on screen for you. Essentially what we're doing is the alternative in the RAR, because there were some lines through the existing conditions and new conditions, I've just tidied that up. We'll put it on screen, and that would then form a resolution that can be voted on.
May I ask a follow-up question, please, Deputy Mayor? So then, if we are of a mind to put forward this alternative, then this becomes the city's RAR that is presented to the DAP, or does the officer's RAR still get presented to the DAP, and then this is essentially the council's submission, if that makes sense?
Thank you, and through you, presiding member, the RAR and the wording in it essentially remains the same, apart from the council's recommendation. So it will be the council's recommendation for approval. If that's passed, that would be the recommendation to the JDAP.
I'll just give you a moment to read this, and then I'll be asking for a mover and seconder. Thank you. It looks like they're all the usual conditions. Is there anything extra that perhaps we should talk to? Thank you. Thank you, Manager of Planning.
Thank you, and through you, Deputy Mayor Stroud. The only difference from the original application to the amended plans was an undertaking by the applicant for public art, and that was denoted on their plan. So we've added a condition on that, which is now generally being a standard condition in the planning sense. So we've added condition 13, I think. It's right there, public art. Apart from that, most of the conditions are generally standard you'd expect to apply to a multi-storey development.
Thank you. Is Council ready to now? Thank you, Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Stroud. I just note on the RAR that item at point 18 has been deleted, which was prior to occupation of the northern boundary wall, where within 1.5 metre of the vehicle access point to be amended. That's been removed as a condition in that the reasons. Can you just explain why that was removed and maybe there's a good reason for it?
Thank you. And through you, Presiding Member, yes, that was resolved by the applicants in the amended plans. So when they came back, that was an issue that was outstanding, but one of the issues that they resolved. So there's no need for that condition.
Okay, we're ready. Thank you, Council. Can I have a mover and a seconder to this alternative? Okay, thank you, Councillor Mansfield and Councillor Davis. Councillor Mansfield, would you like to speak to this item?
I'll only speak briefly. Much of the reasons why I am moving this alternative have been discussed in the former debate, particularly as outlined by Councillor Davis. It's not a decision that I take lightly. I fully respect our planning officers and their skill and expertise. But I do believe that in this particular situation, the applicant has amended their plans in accordance with what's been asked of them by the DAP. And as a result, I think that they are putting forward a development that is compliant. Of course, we're not the ultimate decision makers here. We know that. We know that this is going to be assessed by the JDAP. But I think it's important that Council does show some support for the applicant and the efforts that they've made so far. So that's why I'm moving this alternative.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
I'll keep it brief. Yeah, look, I'm happy to support this. Not only do I think it's a pretty significant impost to a single landowner to request that they undertake an LDP for an entire precinct, but I think as the predominant landowner in that precinct, I'd like to think that the city would have control over that process because we have a significant amount of skin in the game, so to speak. So I like the fact that ultimately JDAP are going to make this decision, but there's some recognition from Council here that that LDP process is more complex than it may look at face value.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this item, for or against? Okay, thank you. Councillor Mansfield, would you like to close on this item? Thank you. Then let's put it to the vote. Thank you. I think you two need to speak a little more strongly on this. We have another casting vote, 2 in one night on the one item. Yes, I will vote for the alternative. Thank you. That one. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Just give me a moment. So we're moving on to C10, which is page 42 of your agenda items. It involves the purchase and dedication of Austin Street Laneway as a public road. I believe Councillor Jennings pulled this off en bloc. Can I have a mover and a seconder to this item? Thank you, Councillor De Vries. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Nash, thank you. Councillor De Vries, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Nash, would you? Thank you. Councillor Jennings, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I will speak to it. I asked this not to go through en bloc because I had some concerns about why the city is doing this, and I still don't understand why the city is doing it. And on the basis of the questions that I asked at the agenda briefing forum, which was, is there a policy or a principle behind the purchase? Is it to facilitate significant redevelopment in the area because the zoning is high or has been increased under LPS 5? That wasn't the case. Have all property owners that might use the lane at the discretion of the current owner, have they all got frontage to the main streets? And they all do. So those three things suggest to me that I don't think it's something that the city should necessarily be doing it. And as I said, I don't really understand why we are doing this if all the landholders have got access otherwise, and there's only a few people that are affected. We don't have any policy to be, buying these private laneways or land that's currently privately held that's being used in that way. Also, I note that if the landowners who currently use the laneway would like to access, use that and get some formal rights that might allow them to do some extra development on their own land, then that's something that they could negotiate privately with the current owner and get some formal, access rights by way of easement or such. Anyway, that's up to individual owners to work that out. But as I see it, it's not the city's role to be buying this land to dedicate it as a public road. And I won't be supporting it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Okay, thank you. Councillor De Vries, would you like to close the item? No, then I'll put the item to the vote. Thank you. Thank you. The item has been carried 6-4. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of difficulty reading this screen, so now I've just worked it out. Okay, 6-4. Thank you. Moving on to item C11. C11 on page 45 is the adoption of the Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates. And we also have an amendment to this item by Councillor Hammersley. Can I have a mover and a seconder to the item? Thank you, Councillor McMullen and Councillor De Vries. Thank you. Councillor McMullen, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I expect there's not a lot to say about the recommendation. Most of the debate's probably to be had in relation to Councillor Hammersley's amendment. As is, the recommendation and the code and what it says about personal integrity is good. I look forward to the debate about whether it can be made better. So happy to support it as is. Also happy to hear the debate later on about possibly amending it.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Councillor De Vries.
I concur with Councillor McMullen. I think that the fact that this is now in the Local Government Act and that this will be adopted by all councils in West Australia is a good thing. I also believe that it covers all the areas of concern, which are the general principles, behaviour and rules of conduct, most of which are common sense and we would all be adhering to. But just in terms of the other area which I'm pleased about is that it also encompasses candidates, and I think that's important when someone's running for council, that they are made aware of these requirements, and I think it's something that any candidate who is standing for local government would be well advised to read up on this and become familiar with it so that they don't encounter any roadblocks along the way or difficulties in understanding the process. So that's just something that I thought about this evening. But I also look forward to the debate and the discussion around the Division 3, which is, as we know, an area where we can make amendments. I attended the workshop and I believe that in Division 3 behaviour, it is possible within local governments for that to be amended and changes made without changing adding to, without removing from the numbers 7 to 15 in the Division 3 area. So I believe that's what's only number 8 is being looked at tonight. So is that correct? I might be wrong there. But certainly we're not making enormous changes to that code of conduct, but just some elements added to. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Hammersley to introduce her amendment, do we have any speakers against this item? No, thank you. Okay, Councillor Hammersley, would you like to present your amendment? And do I have a seconder for the amendment? I assume, sorry, you were moving your amendment? Yes. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Hammersley's amendment? Councillor Powell? Okay, thank you. Councillor Hammersley.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have added this amendment with a view to improving what has already been mandated. We don't really have any choice with respect to what is deemed by the regulations. We have to adopt it. So that part's not optional. Whether we add anything is, of course, optional. Now, my own view is that the makers of the regulation, being the current government, actually would have, I think, fairly intended that not only would things be factually correct, but they'd also not be misleading. I mean, that's a very commonly understood thing, but it doesn't hurt to spell it out in plain language. It is quite easy to say things that are factually correct, but not complete, and that can cause misunderstanding. And I don't think that it's helpful for any local government to have public debate going on which is not based on all of the relevant information. So that's really the underlying intent of it. I don't think it takes things much further. I don't think anybody should have any disquiet about adopting it, because I wouldn't have thought anyone would be wanting to mislead and cause the sort of debate that is not helpful, because it's just not based on all of the circumstances that something's occurring. So I think that's all I can say, and I'll just leave it to people to form their own view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hammersley. Councillor Powell.
I'll reserve, thank you, Presiding Member.
I think I was picked up recently at a Central Zone meeting for serving a right amendment. Yeah, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes, very briefly, just to support what Councillor Hammersley said, and I mean, I think it's fairly straightforward, fairly logical that controls that already exist or codes that already exist that for existing media should really also cover, sort of new and growing media. Thank you, especially the social media.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Would anybody else like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Mansfield.
I actually have a question, presiding member, to the staff. So I am just reading through the amendment, and I just have a question about how this, I guess in general, but particularly in relation to this amendment, how this would kind of be enforced, if you like, that this policy or this aspect of the code of conduct would be enforced, and I guess particularly in relation to, for example, candidates. Could I get some feedback on that, please?
Through you, presiding member. The reason part 2, a candidate is highlighted in track changes is that under the code and the regulations, council can only amend the code in relation to council members and committee members. So by default, we had to separate in the drafting of the amendment a candidate just separately. So the words that are underlined there is just because we've pulled it out as a separate clause. The code as it stands without the amendment applies to candidates as it's shown on the screen. In terms of how it comes into practice is that if a candidate breaches the code of conduct, if they are then elected, then that breach can be processed under Division 3. If they're not elected, it can't be.
And then following on from that, my understanding is it's really just a matter of whether another elected member or staff member or member of community wish to follow through that breach. Would I be right? So that is effectively the enforcement, just like every other rule we have or every other form of breach, it just plays out that way. Yes, thank you, Councillor McMillan.
I'll just start with a question, and I'm very wary about questioning other people's drafting, but I just wonder if the words "and also that" should be deleted, because we go from talking about publishing material in the singular to public statements in the plural, and then back to talking about something in the singular, and it just reads a bit strange to me.
Councillor Hammersley, are you prepared to, would you like to read out a change of words, and we will see if the mover and seconder are prepared to, no, that hasn't come through yet, no, so that's not right. So it's, yes, are you prepared to make an adjustment to those words?
Yes, so as I understand, it's proposed to take the words "also that is" out. I would accept that.
So therefore the amendment would read following factually correct and is not misleading, including by omission. Is that the intent? Okay. And not misleading, we're taking out is as well. Okay. Councillor Powell, you happy with that change in the amendment? Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Look, it's a question, I suppose it continues on from Councillor Mantfield's question, and that is, who decides that something is misleading? Who decides that a social, a post on socials might have an omission? Who decides whether there's innuendo in that post? It seems to me that this is sort of starting to get towards someone's perspective. I mean, who is it that determines?
Look, I'm happy for governance to answer this, but my understanding is this model code comes to council, or it can also go to the standards panel. So council will decide, and what happens is the person who believes there is a breach writes up their reasons and so on and puts it in, and then the person who feels who have been breached against, they will put their argument forward, and then it's all presented to council, or it may go on to a standards panel. Is that right? Do you want to add anything to that? Thank you, Director Hawkins.
Through you, Presiding Member, these are under Division 3, and the process under Division 3 is it's the local government that then determines if there has been a breach or not. As the presiding member is indicating, is that in relation to interpreting the amendments here, if they were carried, it would be up to a person that's making a complaint. They would lodge a complaint saying, I believe this hasn't occurred, and then it would go through a process which we will be bringing to council at a future meeting for council to resolve how that process works. But it's the local government that determines if a breach has occurred under Division 3.
Thank you, Councillor McMullen. Was that your hand up earlier?
Yeah, I was just going to speak after my question. Is now an appropriate time? Yeah, I'll speak for the amendment. In assessing it, I've asked myself two questions. The first is it necessary? And look, I don't think it is, and I don't think even Councillor Hammersley is saying it's necessary per se. When you look at the wording of paragraph A, it talks about the use of social media, and presumably that would apply to one's own posts as well as the moderation of one's own social media page. And you probably do have to take a bit of responsibility for the comments that get posted on your social media pages. But I do like how paragraph C kind of puts the position beyond doubt and really spells out what council's expectation is. It may be that if you're an elected member or a candidate who posts outrageous things on social media, that you need things spelt out for you with abundant clarity, and I think C does that. I accept that there may be some concern that B leads to judgment calls being made, but I think that's inherent in applying these types of code provisions, and even if we don't amend this particular part of the code, there's going to be plenty of other judgment calls that will need to be made, and I think it just comes down to an assessment of reasonableness and people's objective expectations. That the types of things that are going to trigger these provisions of the code are usually pretty clearly wrongful, and I don't think there's going to be too many grey areas leading to complaints and such. I think we can rely on council to apply the amended code provisions appropriately and sparingly. So I think it's a good belts and braces approach to amend what's up there, and I think it's going to be a good way forward for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have another speaker's question? Thank you, Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question of the staff. In the report, it does mention that work has started on a policy. When we discussed that in the workshop, it was brought up that it would be necessary to ensure that this new power, which is quite a power and will need to be exercised extremely responsibly, will require a policy to ensure that natural justice, proper process are followed. I'm just wondering when we might expect that work. I mean, it's quite a big job, but what sort of program are we on to try and get a policy to council to make sure that the kinds of anxieties which I'm hearing from other elected members, which are fair enough, will be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hawkins.
Through you, Presiding Member, I would add, just for clarity, also procedural fairness is what we're trying to ensure is captured in that policy as well. We're doing work on it. We have a draft that we're currently working on. Our intent is to bring it to a strategic workshop for elected members to review before bringing it through to council. We would like to do that as soon as possible with the aim of getting a policy in front of council for adoption so that there is a clear process around how these matters will be dealt with as soon as possible.
Thank you, Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Stroud, this is a question just harking back to the candidates, which I was not so long ago, that when they come into the space of running for local government, would it be at all possible to consider giving them some sort of workshop or briefing prior to their sort of throwing themselves to the fray, so to speak? Is that something that we would consider or might be possible? Thank you. If you haven't got enough to do already, that is.
I actually understand that's the responsibility of the Electoral Commission. Do they, or do we do a briefing? Yes, we do. We do. I remember now. Yes, thank you. Director Hawkins, would you like to add to that?
Through you, Presiding Member, we do provide a briefing. We normally do it as a joint thing with other councils in the western suburbs. And all candidates that nominate are encouraged to attend. It's not compulsory, but we encourage them to attend, and we provide a briefing and go through. We also provide information packs to candidates, and so these kind of changes and information will need to be updated in those information packs and circulated for the next elections.
Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Okay, thank you. Then we will put it to the vote. Thank you. We are voting on the amendment first. Thank you. So that amendment is carried 7-3. That becomes part of the substantive motion. And that was moved and seconded by Councillor McMullen and Councillor De Vries. Now that it's an amended motion, you can all speak to it again if you wish. Would anybody like to speak to the substantive motion? Thank you. Councillor McMullen, would you like to close?
Reserve my right. Pass.
I guess that means you don't wish to close on the item, so we will be putting it to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. That has been carried unanimously, 10-0. Thank you, Council. We're moving on to C12, and that is another model standard for this time for the CEO recruitment, performance and termination. It's page 48. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this item? It had to be brought down because we require an absolute majority. Councillor Hammersley, thank you. And do I have Councillor Jennings? Thank you. Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Jennings? No, thank you. Would anybody like to speak for or against this item? Thank you, Council. Then we'll put it to the vote. That's carried unanimously 10-0. Moving on to item C13, which is the 2021 ordinary local government election, which will be in October of this year. Once again, we needed an absolute majority vote for this item. Do I have a move and a seconder? Councillor Nash, thank you, and Councillor Davis. Councillor Nash, would you like to speak to the item? Councillor Davis. Would anybody like to speak to this item for or against? No, thank you. Then we'll put the item to the vote. That's carried unanimously 10-0. Thank you, Council. We move on to now item C15. Once again, it had to be removed for a absolute majority vote, and it's the budget review for March 2021 on page 56. Do I have a mover or a seconder for this item? Councillor Hammersley. Do I have a seconder for this item? Councillor Mansfield, thank you. Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to the item? No. Councillor Mansfield, no. Would anybody like to speak for or against this item? No, thank you, Council. We will then put it to the vote. That item has also been carried unanimously 10-0. Okay, Council, we'll just finish off the meeting now. We have agenda item 12, new business of an urgent nature approved by the person presiding or by a decision of the meeting. Nothing has been drawn to my attention, so we will move on that item. And agenda item 13, meeting closed to the public. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. There's no item relevant there, no confidential item. So moving on to agenda item 14, closure of the meeting. I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 20th of April 2021 closed at 6:56 p.m. Thank you, councillors and staff, for your work tonight.